Psycho-Epistemology I, Lecture 2.
Good morning again. Let's, before proceeding, review what I covered last time. We covered that psychoepistemology is Ayn Rand's term for the study of the interaction in cognition between the conscious and the subconscious. We discussed the subconscious as a storehouse and the conscious mind as the judge of information coming from that storehouse, from the subconscious. And I gave you an analogy to a business where the conscious mind is like the executive who must manage his subconscious, i.e. the subordinates. Now, we talked last time about the process of judging what comes up from the subconscious, and the next topic that I want to begin with is the conscious mind as sending orders down to the subconscious. Sending orders down. Here I can think of two subcategories at least. The first one of orders sent down are orders for physical action, for voluntary muscular contractions, as in waving my arm. It's the conscious mind, of course, that initiates bodily actions. And it's too often overlooked when we talk about consciousness that the ultimate output is not intellectual but existential action. Consciousness, the whole faculty of consciousness, exists for the sake of guiding action in the world. Viewed biologically, awareness is for the sake of guiding action. Knowing is not an end in itself. Theory is for the sake of practice. So the whole faculty of awareness, which includes the conscious and the subconscious, is for the sake of acting to sustain life. So sending orders down to control muscles and perform bodily actions is one category of orders that are sent down. We all perform coordinated actions like standing, walking, or running without thinking. These skills are automatized. You are not born being able to stand, let alone walk or run. Now, where is that automatization held? Where is that learned control of your body held? Well, it's stored in the subconscious. Why? Because the conscious mind can directly activate them, can directly control or release these automatized action sequences. You remember last time I distinguished subconscious from physiological. You cannot directly will to increase your heart rate, but I can directly will to wiggle my fingers. So even though the action sequence here involves automatized connections, automatized knowledge of how to control my body, it's not something that's on a parallel to the control the brain exercises over the heart rate. It's not physiological. It involves subconscious automatization. I just tell myself, as my subconscious, walk over here, and lo and behold, it happens. This issue comes into sharp focus. The difference between subconscious and physiological comes into sharp focus when you try to learn some new physical skill, such as dancing. Then you can't rely on automatized subconscious integrations. The conscious mind has to select each subunit until, with practice, it can be integrated into a larger unit, and then you just have to tell yourself, waltz. But in the beginning, it's 1, 2, 3. And the subunits here, 1, 2, 3, are themselves automatized knowledge of how to control your body. You are able to step for the 1 because you learn to walk. That itself is automatized, but the new skill is putting together the subunits into a larger unit. I think, incidentally, that studying the subconscious integrations involved in the learning of physical skills is one good research strategy for studying the general phenomenon of cognitive integration, automatization, actually, not integration, automatization. It's easy to study there, and there's a big payoff and big motive in a direct, immediate way to learning how to build skills more efficiently, which is the learning of an automatization. So the orders to the body are one category of orders sent down by the conscious mind to the subconscious. Let's turn now to the intellectual side, orders sent down for a cognitive purpose. Now, the first such type of order is the order to file. And this is, again, a term that Ayn Rand used. She not only likened concepts to file folders, she also spoke informally about needing to file information in your subconscious, needing to straighten out your files, to file correctly. The conscious mind controls what is filed and how it is filed. And by filing, we mean placing it in permanent storage in your subconscious database. Filing is writing to disk. Or if you don't like computers, it's placing in a file folder in a file cabinet papers that heretofore were just lying out on your desk. Filing depends on what we talked about yesterday, on judgment. As far as I can see, it depends crucially on two judgments, on judgments of truth and importance. First, truth. Once you judge that this is true about something, then it places a certain implicit demand on your subconscious. Things judged as true need to be stored and integrated. Things judged to be false are either discarded, or in the case of a recurring or fundamental falsehood, like, say, altruism, it is filed in a specially quarantined area. Wrong ideas, dangerous ideas. Now, I've already implicitly gotten into judgments of importance, because what I'm saying is that important falsehoods that affect you, get retained, as opposed to, for instance, when you write down a telephone number and you reverse 2 digits, and oh no, that's not it, it's not 78, it's 87. You don't remember to yourself, it's not 78. I must remember the theory that this phone number is 6527849, because it isn't. No, that's a trivial, unimportant, non-recurring falsehood. But when you hear about altruism or from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, that is important and you want to remember it. The more you are impressed on the positive side with the importance of something true, the more you will tend to remember it. Values are the motor of consciousness. Values are the motor. And judging something as important here carries a value component. Because what does it mean, important? Important to me. It can be something important and good or important and bad, but there's no such thing as important and neutral. In terms of a judgment of importance, consider the scene in Atlas when Dagny is listening to Ivy Starnes. Ayn Rand writes, quote, Dagny heard a cold, implacable voice somewhere within her. Remember it. Remember it well. It is not often that one can see pure evil. Look at it. Remember. And someday you'll find the words to name its essence. Now that's an instruction to file. It's an instruction to file something false, but very important. Now there are other concrete steps other than just telling yourself, remember this is important. There are other concrete steps one can take to promote memory, such as repeating the item over and over again, and working to form associations or integrations. But our concern here is not with developing effective filing techniques or memory techniques. That's a concrete. But with the principle they exhibit, the conscious mind's control over the subconscious. It's the conscious mind's identification of the nature of an issue, the judgment of its truth and importance, that controls its storage. Well-organized, efficient mental files are the products of good, conscious choices. To have organized mental files in your subconscious, you have to work at it. The choice to work at it or not is a directly volitional issue, because the question, do you manage your mind, includes the issue, do you try to judge the fundamental meaning of facts and experiences so they can be filed properly? Do you file by essentials or by random details? Remember the quagga example? A weird word I heard in San Francisco, or quagga is an extinct zebra-like mammal. Whether or not you file by essentials is one of the most important issues that determines whether your subconscious mental filing system is logically organized so that it will function smoothly and efficiently in the acquisition of knowledge and the making of plans, or whether it is that jumbled chaos which it is in the minds of too many individuals. What is an essential? Well, you know, Ayn Rand described it as that on which the most other characteristics depend. That on which the most other characteristics depend. So by definition, the essential is the most fertile fact to know about a given category of things. Filing by essentials is therefore the most fruitful way to file. So identifying the essence of something is a major means of filing it properly. In addition, remember the point that Ayn Rand called informally the crow epistemology. The conscious mind has a limited capacity. 7 units can be dealt with at most. So the more streamlined your identification of things, the better. Shorter is better. See, obeying that very principle. Shorter is better, rather than saying anything you can do to reduce the length of an item with which you're dealing raises its productivity and fertility. And shorter is better. Recall from David Harriman's talk the other night that Ayn Rand used to rewrite her notes in condensed fashion. She did this because it enabled her to hold it, to file it, retain it, use it better in terms of her subconscious. And in my own lecture, How to Study Ayn Rand's Philosophic Writings, I stressed the need for what I called packaging, for reducing the number of units you have to hold and putting them in a neat, tidy, memorable package. An example would be, we all remember without difficulty, existence exists. Short, neat package. Suppose it had been stated instead, everything which isn't existent is, by that very fact, part of the sum total of reality or existence. Who would remember it? So the moral here is that filing is done by thinking. It's not, aside from the order, remember this, which you do sometimes need to give yourself. Remember this. I've got to remember this. The key to filing things is to think about them, to say, well, is this true? What does this mean? What is the essence of this? Is this important? Is it important to me? What is the shortest statement of this important thing, assuming it is important, that I can make? That's the way things get filed properly and remembered. Now, I want to note now a special category of order. It's not filing. Special category of order sent down to the subconscious. It's what Ayn Rand called standing orders. The analogy here is to standing orders you might place at a store, say a butcher shop. You give them a standing order: every Friday, deliver me a T-bone steak. Well, you can do the same thing with your subconscious. For instance, I have personally a standing order to pay special attention to neologisms, newly coined terms that I read in philosophy and politics. So when I first found a writer in the early 80s referring to the homeless, it caused a mental alarm to go off. I'd never heard that term before. I had heard victims of a hurricane referred to as being homeless, but now we had the homeless suddenly appearing in about 1982-83. That caused a mental alarm to go off because I'm on the lookout for newly coined suspect, becomes suspect after you look at it, newly coined political terms. The standing order is an order to store not data, but a conditional instruction. Watch for X, and when X occurs, do Y. Standing orders are extremely important because they extend our control into the future. They are very important in making and breaking habits and help implement a commitment over time. Let me give you a small example of a standing order and a big example, particularly in terms of habits. All of my adult life I've said laissez-faire. Within the last few months I've learned it's laissez-faire, much to my amazement. So now I have a standing order. Always listen for laissez-faire instead of saying laissez-faire. And I slip occasionally, but I have the standing order to watch for it and catch it. A trivial example. Now, a big example. Ayn Rand had, from early childhood, a standing order that when she read a line of literature that she liked, she would ask herself, what makes this good? When she read a line of literature she didn't like, she had a standing order to ask herself, what makes this not work? This was an important means by which she developed her style, and it's a standing order she recommended to aspiring writers to institute in their own minds. Another similar literary standing order she had was when she saw in reality anything that struck her as particularly emotional, positive, negative, frightening, exciting, she would try to describe it in words. I remember one incident where we were standing in Manhattan in the backyard of a townhouse, and it was twilight, and most of the buildings around were low, but at the end of the block there was a high-rise apartment building, and the lights were on in the windows, and we were just looking around, and she kind of whispered to herself, the lighted squares hanging in space, while looking at it. Now that is a standing order that she has to name in her own terms the visual essence of something, because she's a writer. That's not something that everybody would be advised to do, but that's how she developed her style. How do you set standing orders? Well, I don't really know. But I do know it has to be learned. It has to be learned, and it's an acquired skill learned in childhood. One sign of this is certain children's games. There are certain children's games devoted specifically to developing the ability to set standing orders. Can anyone think of a game that's for very young children? Simon Says. I hope you all know that game where the children are instructed. You do what you're told if Simon says it. If Simon says put your hand on your head, then you put your hand on your head. But it must be preceded by the phrase, Simon says, put your hand on your head. And young children can't do this. You utter a few, Simon says put your hand on your head. Simon says wiggle your hands. Simon says clap your hands. Put your hand on your nose. And they put their hand on their nose. Simon didn't say. And this is very amusing and fun for the children, because what it does, if you introspect, what you're learning to do is to put a standing order there for the period of the game. Listen for Simon Says and don't do it until you hear Simon Says. There's also the game May I, which works on the same principle. You have to ask May I before you can take the action. And an older version of the same thing is the game Buzz, where you watch for any number divisible by 7, if you know that in a sequence of numbers. So there's a definite introspectable pleasure in getting this skill down pat. That is, in being confident in your ability to place and rely on standing orders. So I don't know how we do it, but we learn to do it by practice in that kind of way. And I can say this about standing orders. The more delimited and concrete a standing order, the easier it is to implement. For example, it's hard to watch yourself and give yourself the standing order, watch for and correct floating abstractions. I mean, in your own thinking. It's a lot easier to say, watch for and correct your pronunciation of laissez-faire. But suppose you need to correct a tendency to floating abstractions in yourself. Well, it's better to give yourself the standing order, concretize. Look for examples. Be example-oriented. Look for the feeling of vagueness in my mind and seek to give an example. That's more doable. That's more concrete. There's another interesting subcategory, I think, of standing orders, what I call placeholders. Placeholders. These are very short-term standing orders. For example, someone once sent George Bernard Shaw a clipping and wrote on it, "Here is something out of which I hope you will get a kick." Shaw was very interested in language, and he wrote back, "That sentence is the kind of foolishness up with which I shall not put." Now, the humor of these things is that you have to put a placeholder because the person is avoiding putting a preposition at the end of the sentence in abeyance to the dictates of fussy grammar. You have to put a placeholder. That is something out of which, and you don't know out of which, I hope that you will get a kick. And then finally you can release, you can tie the end of the sentence back to that little placeholder that you put at the beginning. I have an excellent example of placeholders which I give in the question period, but I think I better proceed because I don't know anything more about placeholders other than that they exist. But I think you're now starting to see what I meant when I said that this talk is going to concentrate on the universal mechanism of psychoepistemology, not on individual differences. We all use standing orders. We all file. We all use placeholders. That's part of the equipment of consciousness. Okay, the third order sent down, third type of order, as I'm calling placeholders like a type of standing order. The third is retrieval, orders to retrieve information. Getting information out of the subconscious is also something done by an order sent downwards by the conscious mind. And the essential act here, as I indicated in the last lecture, is by asking a specific question. What is the capital of Virginia? Richmond. Or any of the more difficult questions that we've considered, such as, what is an example of so-and-so idea? Or what is the essential of such and such idea? Asking a question is the way we bring the knowledge in our subconscious to bear to solve a problem. Now, the question asking may be in literal words, or it may be implicit. But explicit or implicit, the search for answers is the heart of thinking. Again, the more specific that you can make your question, the better your subconscious will be able to respond to it. So, what's wrong with Kant? Your subconscious may or may not be able to send you up something. If you say, what's wrong with Kant's ethics? Well, that's, if you know anything about Kant, that's more narrow. Now you feel, well, I might have something to say. What's wrong with Kant's idea of virtue? Well, now specific things might start coming to your mind. What's wrong with Kant's idea of virtue in contrast with the objectivist idea of virtue? What is the objectivist idea of virtue? What is its definition? Now, if you have this information in your subconscious, and you can't get an answer if you don't have the information, asking specific questions makes the task easier. And one of the most important things in thinking is to find the right question to ask. That's what gives you the answers, particularly in philosophic thinking, because in scientific thinking you also have to go out and observe reality. It's not all going on inside your head. But an important part of any kind of thinking in philosophy or in an experimental science is getting the right question. That is 90% of the battle. It's finding the right question to ask. Now, there's another aspect of retrieval other than asking questions which needs mention, and that's getting ready for retrieval by establishing a mental set. A mental set. We've all watched TV quiz shows where the contestants are told, all right, now our category is children's games, or our category is geology. When the category is announced, the contestants can consciously prime themselves so that the whole context is activated. Activation of a context, incidentally, probably involves question asking to a considerable extent, because if I put myself in that position, suppose I'm a contestant on the show and they say, all right, our next category is children's games, what would I actually do to prime myself? I would say, well, what are some children's games? Hopscotch, jacks, Simon Says, Ring-a-Levio, hide and go seek. So going through some concretes elicited by asking myself a question, give me some examples, would activate that whole region in my brain. Or if the category is geology, I might ask myself, what is geology? Oh yeah, the study of rocks. What else do I know about them? What do I know about geology? Well, I only know one fact of geology. There are three kinds of rocks: igneous, sedimentary, and some other one, well, I have it written down in my notes, metamorphic. Now I've primed myself for questions on geology as best I can, because that's all I know. So I'm not committing myself to whether context setting always reduces to question asking like that, but question asking at least looms large. The concept of mental set covers more than just the selection of a body of information, as in my first example of questions about geology. For example, there's a purposeful mental set and a non-purposeful one. Sometimes you have an action orientation, an active mental set in the sense of you're going to do something. And sometimes, quite properly, you have the set that you're just going to relax and enjoy yourself. That's a different mental orientation, a different mental set. Rationality requires that you monitor your mental set to see that it's appropriate to your circumstances at the time. Sometimes action and decision making is appropriate. Other times relaxation or contemplation is appropriate. Which mental set you've established ought to be checked regularly by you and adapted to what's appropriate. Now, some mental sets are always inherently inappropriate. Notably, the mental set of neurotic defensiveness. One can be defensive or objective. This is a mental set. Those are two different mental sets. For instance, you're arguing with someone, the argument becomes rather heated, and you get that tight feeling of defensiveness. A second's introspection reveals that your standing order to your subconscious right now is, feed me whatever is necessary to win this argument. Now that is not a reality orientation. It is maintaining a thesis in contradiction to facts. But it has a particular feeling quality. It is a defensive mental set. So it's necessary to attend to your mental set in order to make sure it is not, for instance, defensive. How do you change a mental set? Well, I think just by asking what's appropriate. What's appropriate to what you want in reality. Not what's appropriate by some canon of mental ethics in the sky, but what's appropriate to reality as it's in front of your nose. So you have to recognize the state you're in and determine its relationship to the facts of reality. For instance, in the middle of a heated argument, I continually ask myself, am I being defensive? I already know the relation of the defensive set to reality. So identifying it as defensive is usually enough to eliminate it. If not, what else I can do, or any of us can do, is shift your focus to reality by asking the right kind of question. For instance, stop focusing on what face you will lose if you lose this argument, and ask yourself, what's the truth here? Let the chips fall where they may. Okay, now that concludes my discussion of the kinds of things that are done by the conscious mind in relation to the subconscious. You judge what comes up and you send things down and pull things up. Your mind asks questions, judges what comes up and sends orders down, and as far as I can tell, that's pretty much all the conscious mind does. It's by doing those things, filing, retrieving, judging, that you run your subconscious rather than being run by it. That's what it means to manage your subconscious. By managing your subconscious, you are able to think, evaluate, plan, act, learn, and develop a moral character. Now that brings me to my next major topic, which is volition and morality. It's considered psycho-epistemologically. I mentioned this in the last lecture, that objectivists, like people in general, get confused about what they are responsible for morally. And I reminded you that the objectivist theory of free will is that the direct locus of volition is the choice to focus your mind or not, and I assume you are familiar, at least in a general way, with the concept of mental focus. I want to now integrate that further with psychoepistemology. So first, distinguish focus from problem solving. Focus is a more fundamental issue. Focus is a primary orientation to reality. It is a state of active alertness, a readiness to use your mind in whatever way is appropriate under the circumstances. So you can be in full focus just walking around San Francisco, soaking up the sights, without being engaged in any intellectual task. Your assignment is just to enjoy the atmosphere. But then again, you could walk around San Francisco out of focus, in a mental fog, with semi-explicit, half-digested, unanalyzed thoughts mumbling to yourself in your head, just wool gathering, as it's called. So even though two people walking around San Francisco, neither one of them is engaged in an active process of thinking, one could be in focus and one could be out of focus. Focus is wider and deeper than thinking. In fact, thinking is a state of focus applied over a span of time to the solution of a specific problem. Thinking, as I said, is question asking, judging the answers, and posing new questions to solve a problem. Now that's more or less of a review of what I said on Tuesday. Let's now look at it in terms of some of the more advanced material I've covered in this lecture. I said on Tuesday that the issue of focus is the issue of, are you managing your mind or not? Are you issuing orders or not? Right? Are you judging or not? Now we see that it means that your conscious mind is alert to and judging what comes up from the subconscious and is prepared to send down whatever filing and retrieving orders and to set whatever standing orders are appropriate. Now looking at it this way, I think makes a lot of questions about focus that objectivists have easier to answer. Consider this question. Is the choice to focus harder for some than for others? Is it harder for an evader who has built up a bad character? Is it harder for him to focus than it is for a good man to perform the primary act of focusing? Now let's rephrase that in terms of what we've learned. Is it harder to manage your mind if you are, say, James Taggart than if you are John Galt? I would say no. Something is certainly harder for Taggart, but it is not this primary choice to manage your mind or not to manage your mind. It's infinitely harder for Taggart to get anywhere working with his intellectual equipment. It is infinitely harder for Taggart to answer questions correctly, but it is not harder for Taggart to ask them. The primary choice to take charge or not is, I believe, the same for all men. In terms of our analogy, the effort to oversee the business is the same. The results vary, and the unruliness of the subordinates vary. The subordinates in Taggart's mind, his subconscious processes, are used to having their own way. He has placed wishes over the facts, and thus has encouraged his wishes to assert themselves. He has automatized disintegration. He has, by repeated evasion, roped off many blind alleys in his database. As a result, his psychoepistemology is, well, a garbage heap, to put it generously. But all that influences only the result of what he gets when he tries to manage. The sheer trying is not harder. Let me give you another analogy. Having well-developed muscles, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, makes weightlifting easier. But the choice to set a goal of weightlifting and to decide when you've reached that goal is the same for me and Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's the lifting that's hard, not the overseeing. And it's the same for mental work. It's the content of thinking that's hard, not the being in focus. The effort to focus has the same degree of difficulty for everybody, which is a good thing, because otherwise, how would you hold people morally responsible for doing it? If it's excruciating for some and a walk in the park for others, then you've in effect put in some deterministic element into what is a primary volitional choice. The effort to focus has the same degree of difficulty for everybody. What differs is the degree of your success, how far you can get in a given period of time, how much weight you can lift, and how easy it is for you to sustain concentration on a given topic, how many repetitions you can do. It's easy for John Galt and hard for James Taggart to concentrate over time on the same issue. Concentration isn't the same as focus. Concentration is focus applied to a specific topic to answer a specific question. So to understand volition, we have to distinguish effort from results. Psycho-epistemologically, this means, do you run your mind? Are you in the driver's seat? Or are you a passenger in your own head run by your subconscious? Where your car will take you is a separate issue, or how fast it'll drive. And that is now what I want to turn to. What determines cognitive success? Not the trying, but the succeeding. How is volition related to cognitive success? Can we say that in degree that you try, you succeed? Well, obviously not. Many factors other than trying, that is, other than pure volitional effort, are involved in finding the answers to questions. But on the other hand, your free will influences all of these other factors. First, the first other factor that influences whether you get answers, the state of your knowledge, obviously, importantly affects the efficacy of your cognitive efforts. The payoff of your cognitive efforts will be incomparably better if you've learned a body of knowledge, and it will be better if you've learned a philosophy that helps you understand what knowledge is and how to deal with it. So if you've learned objectivism, the state of your knowledge will be better. And it would be better still for those raised and educated by objectivists in a future world. The more you know in general about philosophy, epistemology, the better your cognitive success will be. And the more you know on the specific subject you're thinking about, the easier it will be to gain more knowledge about it. Knowledge builds on knowledge. So the process is a virtuous circle. But of course, what knowledge you have depends upon earlier acts of free will. The way you get knowledge is by trying to learn things over the whole course of your life. So knowledge at any given moment is fixed. You have a fixed amount that you've learned so far. But that's the result of all those past choices, to try to understand or not, to ask questions or to remain passive. So that's for the issue of knowledge. It's based on volition as a necessary condition over the past course of your life. But at any given moment, you've got what you've got. What about intelligence in terms of affecting cognitive success? Now, the extent to which the upper limit of one's intelligence is genetically determined, the upper limit, is unknown, really. But it's reasonable to hypothesize that the upper limit is set genetically, just as it is for musculature. However, we know that most people use only a fraction of their potential, just as most people don't develop the maximum Arnold Schwarzenegger type body that they could develop. And one's effective intelligence is greatly affected by one's psychoepistemology. And that is in turn greatly affected by one's free will over a lifetime. To a considerable extent, I believe that one gets the working intelligence one deserves. I believe to a considerable extent, one gets the working intelligence one deserves, whatever one's theoretical upper limit. Here again, there's a virtuous cycle. The more you make the right choices, the more you take charge of your mind by filing, retrieving, and judging under conscious control, the bigger mental muscles you will develop. Did you know that Ayn Rand said that she thought writing Galt's speech made her more intelligent? Not just more knowledgeable, but more intelligent. However, intelligence is to be analyzed, whether its source is genes, choices, or as I think, some combination of those two. Obviously, intelligence affects the extent to which your thinking will succeed or fail at any given cognitive task. But the point remains, for a given degree of working intelligence and a given degree of knowledge, the more you try to understand, the better will be your psychoepistemology, and the better success you will have then using it. Why do I say that? Well, what makes a good psychoepistemology? Well, it means your files are well organized. It means you remember things. It means that you're able to put in standing orders that your mind actually enacts. And what is responsible for all this? A good psychoepistemology. How does that happen? Well, the good filing comes from judging. This is important, this isn't. This is true, this is not. This is an essential, this is a detail. And similarly, all the other, the ability to place standing orders and so forth, it comes from doing. A good, a well-organized, effective, strong, efficient, subconscious equipment that responds well to conscious direction comes from practice. It comes from doing it a lot. There's no other way it can happen. So whatever the influence of intelligence and background knowledge, working to understand will clean up your subconscious database and strengthen your mental muscles. There's no question about it. Effort is certainly a necessary condition of succeeding. And the sum of past efforts or non-efforts greatly affects everything else about the state of your subconscious, including your knowledge, your working intelligence, and the efficiency of your psychoepistemology. That's why I think choice, free will choice, is a fundamental in terms of cognitive success, but over the long run. Now let's turn to another closely related issue that's clarified by this understanding of psychoepistemology: character. Character. What is the relationship of volition, free will, to character? Moral character. Character is automatized moral values. A lifetime of individual choices, small and large, add up to your character. It's the sum of your past choices. So character is really the state of your subconscious, as produced by years of being in focus and managing your subconscious, or being out of focus. Years of letting it run on autopilot. A rational psychoepistemology has to be earned, and a good moral character has to be earned. Both are earned by the choices you make day by day, moment by moment. The choice to seek awareness or not, to seek clarity or not, to form your own judgment by questioning yourself about the facts, or to substitute the judgment of others. Such choices condition your subconscious to be of one sort or another. It automatizes a good or a bad psychoepistemology. And psychoepistemology plus premises equal character. Psychoepistemology plus the content of your automatized values equals character. Leonard Peikoff has defined character as follows. Character is your nature or identity, insofar as this has been shaped by the moral values you have accepted and automatized. Automatized. Your nature or identity, insofar as this has been shaped by the moral values you have accepted and automatized. Character doesn't change from moment to moment, only very slowly. And thus, something that I think is very important to realize, the actions possible to any given individual at any given time lie within a narrow range. A person with the fully rational character of an Ayn Rand, if they go out of focus for a moment, would not be able to take the kind of immoral actions that a man of lesser character might do almost routinely. Ayn Rand out of focus one afternoon would not be able to take LSD. Would not be able to do it. It'd be a physical impossibility or a psychological impossibility. Why not? Because what does it mean to be out of focus? And this is again another payoff of understanding psychoepistemology. To be out of focus means to be run by the subconscious without any conscious supervision of the subconscious. But what is in the subconscious of a person who has lived their whole life rationally? Not the desire to take LSD. For a rational man, both his reason and his emotions, both his considered judgment and his automatic subconscious reactions, are wholly against things like taking LSD. So whether he goes by reason or emotion, whether his conscious mind is regulating his subconscious or even on autopilot, nothing within him views taking LSD with anything less than horror. By the same token, if an Immanuel Kant were to come into focus for a minute some afternoon, that wouldn't enable him to see suddenly that reverence for the self is the essence of morality. Why not? Because of what a life of self-deception has done to his subconscious. He lacks both the required subconscious files and the required psychoepistemology. He can't bring that information up from the mess that's down there in his subconscious. He's carefully stapled many files shut. So when he asks himself about the self, he prohibits certain information from coming up. Now I'm talking about what happens on one moment in one afternoon. And I say there's a narrow range within which a person can act, but that's a moving range. The border is not fixed. It's changeable, but only slowly. If a rational person begins to let go of his mind, or worse, to evade, that shifts his range of possible actions toward the evil. Today you go out of focus to break your diet. You don't take LSD because you couldn't. But today you go out of focus to break your diet. Tomorrow you're still out of focus and you insult a friend. The next day you remain out of focus, and to try to repair your friendship you tell a lie. The day after that, when the lie is discovered, you lose your friend, but you deceive yourself about what went on. It won't take too long a period engaging in such irrationality before you are on drugs. I don't mean it would literally be a day and a day and a day, but the If you go out of focus, that enacts certain consequences, which shifts the range of the good and the bad actions that you're able to do. It shifts, it messes up your subconscious if you're out of focus. You start sabotaging it, and you become capable of worse and worse existential actions. Now, the same thing can happen in a benevolent direction. A person towards the bad end of the scale reforms himself slowly by staying in focus, facing facts, whether painful or not. Well, if he does that, he improves his psychological well-being and becomes capable of better and better actions. Of course, there are limits here. Hitler could not reform himself because the first step required by that reform would be suicide. But the actions behind your character are cumulative. Everything that you do, every choice that you make to manage or to let things slide results in a neater, more efficient, better organized subconscious, or a sloppier, worse, more sabotaged subconscious. Now, I think that really is an important thing to recognize in judging yourself and judging other people. What is their character now, which cannot be changed instantly, and yet that they're responsible for that character by having built it up over a long process of choices in the past. Now, I promised in the description of the course a discussion of a new slant on creativity, and I want to turn to that even though it has no particular logical connection to the preceding. It's just under the heading of interesting new slants on old topics that come from thinking about psychoepistemology. So creativity. What is creativity? Well, I would say roughly, it's the ability to bring a value into existence by means of a new and non-obvious mental integration. Now, the reason I say roughly is I have the phrase non-obvious in there, which is a negative, but I don't know how to state it positively. A solution to a problem is not creative, even if it's new, if it follows routine, standard procedures that can be performed automatically. Question? What? Well, I hate to call it a definition, but it's the best characterization I can give it to it now. The ability to bring a value into existence, create, in other words, a value, by means of a new and non-obvious mental integration. And it's non-obvious that needs explanation. Why couldn't we just say by means of a new integration? Well, suppose I am the first one in the world, as I probably would be, to multiply 11,985,620 by 456,010. I can guarantee you that I could do a multiplication problem long enough that no human being has ever performed that multiplication before in history. So it would be new, and maybe it's a value for some particular reason, but that's not creative. I reach it mechanically, automatically, by following the prescribed rules of multiplication. Now contrast that with something that's new, that's creative. What occurred to me was Ayn Rand's inventing of the phrase, "Who is John Galt?" This is a highly creative way of solving a problem. The problem of bringing into her novel from the beginning a hero who must remain hidden for the first half of the novel. Galt is there, yet he's not there. His name is simultaneously on everyone's lips, and yet he's totally unknown. A seeming contradiction which she solves by inventing a catchphrase. Now that, I think, is a very creative, ingenious device that she came up with. And it's not that she said, oh yeah, I'll use ploy 27, the catchphrase using the hero's name. That's not anywhere around. Considered psychoepistemologically, if creativity means the non-obvious, the non-routine, then in our terms, psychoepistemologically, it means it takes a lot of conscious guidance over the subconscious. The routine, the automatized, like multiplication, is heavily dominated by the subconscious. It's just rote procedures at the one extreme. What we call creative thinking is where the conscious mind has to figure out how to run the subconscious. It's a heavy proportion of conscious intervention and control to subconscious. And the moral of this is that many conventional ideas on creativity are wrong. First, of course, creativity is not a mystical insight. I mean, I don't think that is necessary to dwell on. But it's also not something different from ordinary thinking. It's precisely a lot of ordinary thinking. And often it takes an extraordinary amount of time. Creativity normally means discarding a lot of the ideas that first come to you. Discarding them is not good enough. I was persuaded of this view, that creativity is not a new form of thinking, but just a whole lot of good old-fashioned thinking, by a book that I can halfway recommend to you. It's called The Mind's Best Work. It's by a psychologist, D.N. Perkins, P-E-R-K-I-N-S. There's a lot of things in the book I don't agree with, but I can't really recommend it, but it might be something that if you're particularly interested in this, it would be worth looking at. I agree with its major thesis, which I would put this way. The main requirement of creativity is trying to be creative. I and the author realize there are other requirements, and I want to mention two, but the main one is you have to try to be creative. You have to try to say, what would be a new and unusual way of doing this? What would be the non-standard, non-obvious way to do this? Let me think of something that hasn't been tried before. Kind of a shocking idea, isn't it? Two of the other requirements that I would list is, one, a well-stocked subconscious. You must have mastery of the materials, and you must have a lot of automatized connections. You can't be creative in a vacuum. And secondly, a premise-checking approach that delights in the new. And this is closely related to independence, because the new also includes what other people have done. You have the feeling, well, what other people have done is not good enough. I can do better than that. I'm not concerned with what they did. What's the best I can do? The overall point, which I really find inspiring, is that you get creative ideas by consciously trying to get them, by working at it, by pushing yourself to do better and better until you've got the best. Most people stop with adequate. They got a problem, what would solve it? Ah, that would solve it. Okay, it's done. Now that's a guarantee of non-creative results. Not every problem, incidentally, requires a creative answer. Tying your shoes doesn't require a creative answer. The automatized is good too, but some cases you need a new creative result. Now the assignment on homelessness that I gave you for homework was my attempt to demonstrate that point. To demonstrate the point that trying to be creative makes you creative, more creative anyway. It shows what new good ideas you can come up with if you keep driving yourself to come up with more of them. And I'll discuss the results of that in the question period. Let me just add a personal observation in terms of my own observation of my creative thinking. I find that I'm helped in creative thinking by increasing my sensitivity to half-formed thoughts on the periphery. Remember I mentioned the periphery as it's not quite subconscious and it's not quite conscious. It's a borderline. I suggest you try to coax the material on the periphery into full awareness. And the way you experience that, or at least I do, is the effort to make the less than fully clear, fully clear. It's the abhorrence of approximateness. Your subconscious is smarter than you think, and if you ask it for more, you often get more. So the periphery is like the anteroom. There's material in there that is related, and it has to be checked, particularly if you're seeking the new, the creative. Now, I wanted to also talk about cultural change, but I see we are over time. So if you ask me in the question period, how does psychoepistemology apply to cultural change? I will talk about that. Let me stop at this point. Thank you.